After two of their classmates personally booked their one-way afterlife tickets, Nobuaki, an ugly antisocial otaku, summoned the entire class to a park at night, where he revealed that he had once played the King's game and told his new classmates that they had to clap each other on command or risk joining their ancestors. It was sports day at Cure Academy, and Ui Masatoshi started off the relay race for Class 1 in second place. Kobayashi Yuna, who was the second runner, tumbled over a rock and gave up the class's position, but thanks to Nobuaki, who had developed fast legs from constantly running to save his depressed classmates, they managed to secure a win after he handed the baton over to the lady cheetah named Natsuko. When Nobuaki first enrolled at Kure, he tried to hide his pathetic lack of riz and loneliness in the back seat, but Honda Natsuko was there and tried to figure out the creepshow's problem. When the rest of the class tried to get him to talk to them, the antisocial otaku made a run for it and hid in the school's backyard. Natsuko still managed to find him and tried giving him a chance to rizz her up, but he knew how pathetic he was and took off running again, and this time faster than Usain Bolt.
Run.
After getting back to class later on, the relay race notice was already set up, and they all convinced the Creepshow to join the race, which they had now won. Later that night, he started getting comfortable with his new classmates, and thought about their fun day when they all got a notification from King's Game on their phones. And the antisocial otaku had the most brutal case of deja vu known to man. The next day, he walked into class and met his mates, who were teasing him about the first command from the game, which was for him and Natsuko to exchange certain fluids, and no, it wasn't Gatorade bottles. When he told them that the game was real and they needed to work together to win it or die, he almost got beat up and scared them off, as they thought he had finally gone mental. At the end of classes, Murakami Amy found him on the balcony and told him that there were other ways to get a kiss from his crush besides staging a murder game.
Women.
Apparently, murder riz doesn't work. She even offered him Natsuko's number, but he told her to leave him alone. Later that night, he was at the baseball field counting down the minutes to his punishment when Natsuko found him. She climbed over the fence and asked the otaku out, but he turned her down after telling her about his long-distance relationship. What a fool, I swear all these anime guys lack a little too many brain cells if you ask me. As the seconds counted down to midnight, she tried to kiss him, but he refused and prepared himself to join his ancestors. Once he heard the notification, he let her get her kiss as he thought the time was already up, but when he noticed that she was still in one piece, he checked his phone and saw that he had actually mixed up the actual time with a text message, which meant that he was still in the King's game. Seeing the next command that forbade any of them from getting sleep, he told her to call all of their classmates out to the park while he went to Tsubasa's house, hopefully for a booty call. He made it a bit too late, as by the time he had busted down the door, Tsubasa had already kicked the bucket, so he ran back to the field to meet the rest of his classmates who wanted to know what was going on. When he got there, one of the girls told them that another classmate named Nanami had also unalived herself. While they all started panicking, thinking that Ted Bundy had reincarnated in their town, and Yuichi grabbed the rambling loner by the collar, he revealed that the reason he knew what was happening was because he had played the game and he was the only one that survived the last time. I can only assume it was because he rizzed up the game's master. After they found out that he had intentionally refused to kiss Natsuko knowing she would die, they turned on him and gave him a brutal beating. Just then, a punishment notification for Yuichi came in, and right in front of their eyes, he turned red and popped like a balloon filled with red paint. This game is literally begging these boys to clap females, but they are so dumb that they would rather be unalived. If I was there, I would have made sure the rules were obeyed so quickly I would have more lives than a cat by now.
Yeah, boy.
With their new reality unraveling, Natsuko, who already had a command, realized that she had to let Teruaki clap her in order to survive and tried to get moral support from Nobuaki, but he told her to get on with it, as this was the only way they could survive this. At his former school, a classmate named Toyota Hideki got a command to grab the melons of one Ishii Satomi, but the girls of the class, as well as everyone else, told the creep that it was just an abnormal joke. Later that night, a punishment message was sent, but they all ignored it. The next day, the teacher made the announcement of the deaths of Hideki and Satomi, who had unalived themselves that night. While they all tried to blame it on coincidence, another classmate named Shouta was not playing games with the new command that ordered his girl to get clapped by Daisuke, the class nerd. The next day, while Nobuaki walked to school with Naoya, Shuda was putting the pounding on Daisuke, who had actually clapped his girl despite the warnings. After Nobuaki came and held him back, he decided to complete the day's command, which stated that anyone Shuda gave an order to had to do it or die, and Shuda's order was for Daisuke to unalive himself. After Daisuke ran to the rooftop, Nobuaki met up with him and cheered him up when they realized that they both had a passion for music. Nobuaki then suggested that they have a personal sing-off until midnight so he could keep Daisuke safe. When school closed, Daisuke took Nobuaki and Naoya to his mansion, which explained why he could clap Shuda's girl in the first place. After getting settled in the music room, they waited for nightfall and had a rock-off until midnight had passed. Thinking Daisuke was safe, they sat down and the scared nerd went to get water. Honda Chiemi called Nobuaki and revealed that it wasn't actually midnight, and just then they got a confirmation of obedience text from the game. Nobuaki then bolted and found Daisuke, who had gone to heaven after trying to do some Seuss breath play with ropes. Back in real time, he had completed his crash course, and Teruaki was ready to clap Natsuko on the field immediately. After seeing that this was the only way, Natsuko suddenly went bipolar and scared Teruaki off when she flipped the tables on him. She then pulled Nobuaki aside and tried to choke him out. When he shoved her away, she cried out and told their classmates that he had tried to force her into unholy activities, which led to them resuming the beatdown. Meanwhile, Natsuko, who had gone psycho, was convincing Mizuki to send Nobuaki the death message from her King's Game command. After giving Nobuaki panda eyes and several body modifications, Akamatsu Kenta, the class president, pulled up and demanded an explanation for the exploded sack of organs and the fact that Nobuaki was about to see the divine light. After getting the crash course on their assassination game, he decided to help Nobuaki as his classmates' suspicions of him being Ted Bundy's assistant wasn't enough for them to beat him to a pulp. Natsuko then told Mizuki to add Kenta to the death message blast, but she was done listening to the psycho and cracked her phone on the ground.
No! God, please, no!
Kenta, who was fed up with the bipolar nut job, flung her to the ground and picked up Nobuaki to get help. Mizuki also asked to leave with them as she wanted nothing to do with the class of blood-hungry psychos. After giving Natsuko a much-deserved slap, Kenta left with Nobuaki and Mizuki, but as they walked, he decided to set Nobuaki down and listen to a proper explanation of what exactly was happening. Back at Nobuaki's former school, after Daisuke died, the rest of his classmates quickly started to understand the dangers of their new reality, and they now had a new order to vote for a survivor between Ueda Kana and Hashimoto Naoya, with the loser being the one who would face judgment. What followed was a battle of wits and mind games between Kana and Naoya, with Kana going as far as promising to show all the boys a good time with her melons, and Nobuaki using emotional trauma to thug at the hearts of his classmates for the sake of his best friend. At the end of the day, the votes were counted and Naoya had won the majority. Kana, who had no plans of dangling off a ceiling at midnight, decided to take her punishment into her own hands and went scuba diving out the window. After her Houdini exit, Nobuaki checked her phone and saw that her punishment was actually just to confess to her crush. Later on, Naoya found out that the reason he won the vote count was because Nobuaki had deceived their classmates into believing that he had the secret to surviving the game. That night, while Nobuaki, Naoya, and Chiemi had a discussion, a new order popped up stating that Naoya had to pop his cherry before midnight, which was barely minutes away. With no other choice, Nobuaki sacrificed his love for Chiemi and made her clap Naoya to save his life. Kenta, who now understood his sufferings, consoled him and made him feel better, despite the fact that he was low-key displaying some serial killer traits. Nobuaki had dropped his phone at the park and Natsuko had already found it. Before Kenta could head back to try looking for it, Nobuaki told them that he was headed to a certain village where the King's Game was rumored to have first began its murder spree. Hearing this, Kenta and Mizuki decided to go with him as well, so they decided to head out the next morning. After boarding the train, they told Mizuki to change her broken phone at the next stop and roasted her for trying to dress like a lifestyle influencer when they were headed for a ruined village surrounded by hills. When they asked him about the king of the game, Nobuaki told them about another grave mistake he had made in his former school. A girl named Hirano Nami, who was in his class, received an order to give herself any order she wanted, and the dust-brained fool decided to order herself to touch the king. Although he initially went nuts when he saw the message, she managed to convince him that it was a good idea, as she suspected that the king was one of their classmates, and Nobuaki had supported her delusion. The next day at school, they explained the order to the rest of the class and everybody lined up for touches. But after touching everyone and realizing that she was doomed, Nami stormed out crying. After spending the entire day looking for her, Nobuaki found her by the river and sat with her until midnight as she wanted to confess her feelings for him, but ultimately decided to face death instead. In a weird stroke of luck, her punishment ended up being blindness instead, and she claimed she was happy with it. Nobuaki then received an order to lose something important to him but hid it from Nami, who was still getting used to seeing nothing. When he woke up the next day and couldn't find her again, he went on another fruitless search while blasting calls to everyone, not knowing that she had heard about his order and decided to do something about it. Nobuaki, who ran through the whole town and still failed to find her, went to his house and destroyed everything he had, including the bracelet he got from Daisuke. Then Nami finally called him. She told him goodbye and apologized for stressing him out. Hearing the wind in the background, he raced to the beach and found a phone as well as a love message left in the sand by Nami, who had gone to find the Little Mermaid. After crying in the ocean, Nobuaki saw Ria, an emotionless sadist who claimed to be the king, but Nobuaki called her bluff as Nami had touched her in the class. Ria then reminded him that she was the one that held Nami's hand, which meant she was never actually touched. Seeing that Nobuaki was not playing around, she zapped him and told him that in order to win the game, he had to stop being a delusional nutjob. Meanwhile, two of their classmates, Yaori and Yusuke, were having drinks and catching up outside a store. After he got back home and told Naoya about what happened, Naoya filled him in on their steadily declining numbers, and Yusuke then called him to tell him that after doing a lot of research into the game, he found out that the victims had all received single-word texts from the king before they croaked. When Nobuaki asked about Ria, Yusuke revealed that the sadist had actually been used by her father as a love toy, which was why she had become emotionless. Just then, another order stating that they were to avoid unnecessary actions came through, and what followed was another series of random bucket kicking that made absolutely no sense. Nobuaki then received a call from Shuda, who was choking to death but managed to tell him that he had blocked the king before he also joined the bucket kickers. After the call, Nobuaki and Naoya spread the message to the rest of their classmates, and Nobuaki kept failing to reach Chiemi. After figuring out that Shuda's attempt to block the king was a violation of the rule against trying to drop out, he ran out to find Chiemi and called the rest of the class to update them. But when they started calling back and asking him why they were being punished as they kicked the bucket, he took a minute to understand what was happening and realized that the order against unnecessary things was an order that forbade them from crying. He had already reached his limit and was about to shed a tear when Yusuke called to tell him about Yonaki Village, where the game originated over 3 decades ago. After getting the update, he told Yusuke about the crying rule, but he was too late. Yusuke asked him to take care of Yaori and hung up. As his hands started popping and painting the room, he managed to send his research to Nobuaki and tried to answer Yaori's call one more time but couldn't make it. Regaining his courage, Nobuaki called Yaori and told her not to worry about Yusuke. He then got a backpack to head to the village but got knocked out while sitting. He woke up and saw that he had been tied up by Yaori, who had found out about Yusuke and thought Nobuaki was the king. After he told her the whole truth, she set him free and joined Yusuke, as she also couldn't hold back her tears. After making it to the last train stop, Nobuaki, Kenta, and Mizuki got a cab for the rest of the trip. While they traveled, he continued the story, but this time it was about his precious Chiemi. Naoya, who was trying to get to Nobuaki, got a call from Toshiyuki, who called him to get to a chosen meetup point in town where they wanted to complete the latest order. The game told them to pick a random classmate who would roll a die, and after rolling it, the person had to call the equivalent names of the number of students on the rolled die. The student who rolled the die, as well as the students they called out, would then be punished. After Ria and Nobuaki finally made it to the bench, they started to argue over who would roll the die, and Toshiyuki kept trying to get his friend to roll it in his favor. After Naoya and Nobuaki interfered with his plans, he decided to take Chiemi hostage and held her with a dagger to the neck. With the power play, he made them pick a person to roll it, and after a lot of back and forth about who wanted to be a selfless savior, Naoya picked up the die and rolled it, landing on the very unlucky number 6, which meant that he had to call 6 of his classmates, and he had 10 minutes to do so. When Kita asked him to name Masami, who was in the hospital after trying to unalive herself, Naoya called out to him to scold him for being unfair. A couple of seconds later, Kita's head made like a chopper's blades and spun out of its socket, making it clear that just mentioning the name was all he needed to do. Toshiyuki then forced him to name Masami, Chia, and Minako next. For the last two people, Chiemi and Nobuaki kept asking him to call their names until Toshiyuki's friend Abe knocked him down and made Naoya call their names instead. After the friends escorted each other to Valhalla, Nobuaki comforted his friend who told him to take care of Chiemi before he started to detach and eventually croaked in Nobuaki's arms. Ria, who had somehow survived the ordeal, whipped out a computer and told them that she had combined her research with that of Yusuke to figure out a way to win the game. She told them that the game started as a virus from the village of Yonaki that eventually made its way into the internet and infected them as well. Due to her father being a genius programmer and her research that followed all the single-word texts the victims got, she had developed a bug that she then installed on the game to destroy it. Her plan failed, and as her punishment, she became a human torch. The emotionless sadist barely flinched and simply told the couple, who were all that remained of their classmates, to survive and win in her place before plunging into the darkness. Now, Nobuaki, Kenta, and Mizuki, who were done with their trip, finally made it to the village that started the whole thing. As they made their way into the village, Kenta asked him about Mizuki's order to send 2 dye techs, and he suggested offering up Natsuko, who was bound to cause them problems, and Haruka, who was already doomed since Tsubasa, who was meant to manhandle her melons, had already left the group chat of the living. After coming across a house with Chiemi's family name on the entrance, he went in and saw a picture of Chiemi with her dad. Meanwhile, Kenta, who had lost Mizuki, was running through the woods to find her when his phone got a signal, and he started seeing updates of their classmates who had been punished. Nobuaki, who was still looking through the town, found a diary, and when he tried collecting the picture that flew out, he saw Chiemi's dad, who looked a bit worn out.
You serious?
After looking at the picture and diary, he saw what looked like an apology from the man to his daughters, but as he only knew Chiemi, he wondered who the second girl was, and flipped the picture to see Natsuko's name. She was Chiemi's sister, and from his suspicions, she had also survived a King's game. Kenta, who had finally caught up to Mizuki, found out that she was trying to send the death message to Natsuko and herself. She used the opportunity to try to get him to confess his feelings, but his eggplants were missing, so she took off running. After he managed to find them again and pulled her in for a kiss, she revealed her true intentions for the both of them and asked him to kick the bucket with her. After pushing her back to take a closer look at the psychotic girl's face,
Nice.
he tried negotiating with her and failed as she got fed up with his stupidity and tried to leave. So he knocked her out with a gentle body shot and carried her to the road, where he took her phone and sent the messages to himself and Natsuko. Meanwhile, Haruka was desperately trying to get Tsubasa to hold her melons, and Kuramoto Aya had killed everything she considered important except for her dog Chaco. Nobuaki, who finally caught up to Kenta, felt relieved when he found out that what Natsuko said about changing devices was true. Mizuki's order was still unfulfilled and Tenka was safe, but this wasn't the case, as Mr. High and Mighty had used his self-command to promise to protect Mizuki, and since she was going to be punished, he was going down with her. As the punishments were announced and his legs gave out, he told Nobuaki to leave as he crawled back to Mizuki, who had woken up and started choking, fulfilling her dream for them to kick the bucket as a couple. After setting them beside each other, Nobuaki got a call from his cell that was with Natsuko, who was playing Bounce House on Teruaki, and called to be sure that Mizuki was gone. Natsuko was calling to check in on her greatest target and used the chance to roast Kenta and his girls for being idiots. She also reminded Nobuaki that she had his phone and by that right had control over his life. Teruaki, who was terrified of the bipolar psycho, hid in the bathroom and tried to call someone to tell them about Natsuko's plan, but she had stalked him and took away the phone after reminding him to stay loyal to her. The next day, Nobuaki was at the cab station reading Chiemi's dad's diary of the game, and saw that the one-letter texts were something new to the game, and seemed to be referred to as a mutation or bug the game's developer had no idea about. As he read more into the diary, he got a call from Riona, who demanded to be treated with respect and asked him to head to her house. He got there at noon, and Riona led him to the playground as she didn't want her parents to think she was getting clapped by the abnormal creepshow.
Emotional, damn it!
She then revealed that through personal research she had found out about Shimon Academy, a school that experienced something similar to the death game, and Natsuko was a student there. What piqued his interest was when he told her about the texts sent to the victims, and she showed him another set of the same texts from Yuichi's phone, which meant that his old friends and lost lives were not wasted. They could serve as clues to help them solve the game's mystery. After Natsuko showed up, Nobuaki pulled her aside to ask about her former school and mentioned Chimi's name to see how she would react. But after she brushed it off and left, he knew that she was most definitely going to be more of a problem as time passed. And they then went to an open field where the rest of the class had gathered to play a new game from the king. They had to sit in a circle and take turns to remove and assign their fingers. They could do this by slicing off the finger or breaking it. Their right hands had a positive count, while the left had negative counts, and one that had a negative count by the end of the game was to be punished. After a lot of thinking and side talk, Nobuaki decided to pass on the contest, as did the majority of the guys there. All that was left was Teikura, who asked Nobuaki for permission to cut his hair. While doing that, Natsuko came to get him back in the game. By then, Teikura had finished the haircut and story of his idle dream and proceeded to twist his finger backwards. Teruaki, who had lost his mind, claimed that he was smashing up his fingers to make Natsuko give them back their phones, since he couldn't just take them back. Using the rules of the game they were meant to be playing, he made the psycho return their phones to them, but she still had to get help from their classmates to balance out the 4 left fingers or break hers instead. After the wannabe villainess chickened out of breaking her own fingers, Teikura revealed to her that Amy, her best friend, was working with him and the rest of the group as well. After she kept trying to understand the reason for Amy's betrayal and tried to win her friend back over, she ultimately decided to take Teikura's rock and used it to smash Amy's fingers. After the rest of the gang called her out for doing something so evil to the one person that was rooting for her, she claimed that she had done it for Amy in a twisted and psychotic form of toxic love. Amy, who had peas in her head instead of a brain, immediately gobbled up the nonsense she was saying and claimed that she would always be her friend. Later that day, their finger-breaking game got Teruaki and Aimi hospitalized and bandaged up, and as they left the hospital, Nobuaki asked Natsuko if what her friend had gone through made her change her perspective, but she was still as cold as ever. After leaving the hospital, Nobuaki and Teruaki met up with the rest of their classmates and gave them a pep talk about being good people and helping each other out. Natsuko, who was following close behind, told them to stop listening to the deluded nutjob who thought they were living in a fantasy land. After grabbing him by the collar and telling him to quit giving them all false hope, they got a punishment message and noticed that Teruaki was bleeding out from the head. He had been sabotaged by Natsuko, who got into his unlocked phone and blocked the king, which was against the rules and caused him to get punished by the game, which in turn caused his head to fall out of its original spot and roll on the floor. They wanted to hide what had happened from Ryo, but they were too late as he had already made it back with a new hat for his wounded friend. He went slightly insane when he saw Teruaki's separated head on the floor, and even tried getting his headless friend to smile until Nobuaki tried to explain what happened, and watched as the once happy boy went numb. A new order had come through and ordered them to go on a marathon that would end at the summit of Nuegakubi. At the end of every 8 hours, the classmate in last place would get punished. While everyone else raced to the summit, Nobuaki hung back and helped Ryo snap out of his madness with Riona's help. He also found Amy, who had been abandoned by Natsuko again, so he piggybacked her and started running. Meanwhile, as they ran up a pedestrian bridge, Takuya flung Masatoshi down the flight of stairs and justified his actions with the usual survival of the fittest mantra. The girls who initially tried to help him also took off running as everyone was out to save themselves. Nobuaki and Amy ran into Riona, who had clearly always skipped cardio and was breathing heavier than an overweight bulldog. So Nobuaki asked Amy to wait with her while he fetched them some sodas. Riona, who didn't like head starts even in life and death situations, told them to go ahead, and they eventually caught up to Ryuo and the other girls. Riona, who had finally started running again, realized that her slow pace made her the last runner, which meant that she would likely get punished with a heart attack while in a cold, dark alley. Luckily, the mental patient with an addiction to playing hero showed up again and gave her another drink. Before they started again, they noticed footsteps and saw Masatoshi, who was curious but barely moving. While the trio ran together, Nobuaki started battling demons in his mind and had to be reminded of reality by his friends. As their marathon led into dawn, the trio ran through the high roads by the beach where Masatoshi and Riona stopped for a break. He decided to join them on the edge. As they sat there taking in the morning sun, Masatoshi, whose brain was likely injured in his earlier accident, fell into the water after losing consciousness. Nobuaki immediately jumped in after him. After he failed to save another one of his friends who drowned in front of him, he decided to give up while in the water, but their spirits didn't let him quit and kicked sense into his waterlogged brain. So he resurfaced and Riona used her melons to make him warm. After resuming their marathon, Nobuaki waited until the countdown to the first punishment began and pretended to tie his shoelace while Riona waited in front of him until the countdown expired. The person in last place, according to the king, was Masatoshi, who had already drowned. Although relieved, Nobuaki still didn't like that another friend had been visited by the Grim Reaper. Riona, who knew he intentionally hung back to let her win, painted his face with a slap and promised to crack his nuts if he ever repeated his unwanted charity again. After running for another 8 hours, it was time for the second punishment, and this time, to help Riona feel better, Nobuaki suggested rock, paper, scissors to decide who would stay behind. After winning, he chose to hang back. She followed through with a swift, nut-cracking kick and told him to quit trying to play the hero. When she fell to the ground trying to explain what she was feeling, he bolted and ran backwards so she couldn't catch up. Meanwhile, Ryo was getting scolded for being a spineless man, but luckily for all of them, the person that got punished was Amy, who had been running backwards for hours and eventually just separated from her body while thinking about Natsuko. Seeing that they had another shot at survival, Nobuaki ran back to Riona, who was still on the ground, and told her what happened to Amy. The duo then continued running together, and Nobuaki decided to tell her what happened to Chiemi. After Ria fell to her demise, a younger Nobuaki was left alone with Chiemi. Thinking they had survived the game, it came back with the ultimate order and commanded them to kill the one thing they loved the most. While Nobuaki initially hesitated, Chiemi immediately pulled out a steak knife and asked him to do the honors, but he refused and professed his love for her and desire to spend every waking moment in her arms, so she decided to get the job done herself and made him promise to survive as she slowly expired in his arms. What came next was the final order that was also the ultimate choice that made him choose between receiving a punishment and continuing the king's game. Meanwhile, Natsuko had made it to the summit and completed the command, so she went to set traps for the rest of her classmates. The first to fall for her schemes was the dustbrain Takuya, who followed a random sign and twisted his ankle when he stepped into Natsuko's trap. To ensure that he was going to stay put, she made sure the ankle was properly separated from his foot. Next up was Yuna, who thought the bipolar psycho was trying to lead her to a dead end and went the opposite direction. Riona and Nobuaki finally made it to the base of the summit where Aya and Raiwo were catching their breath. Rina, who was struggling to find a path, stumbled on Takuya and stomped on his face when he asked for help. She left him there with the guilt of what he did to Masatoshi slowly carving away at his soul, and got through the trees until she eventually found Yuna, who told her about Natsuko's directions. Knowing that she had given Yuna the right direction, Rina went the other way, and Yuna fell off the road when she tried to catch up. Rina tried helping her up, but decided to leave when Yuna's weight started to pull her down as well. After she finally made it to the summit, she met Natsuko, who played mind games on her and made her go crazy with paranoia that drove her off the edge. Nobuaki and the rest of his classmates heard her screams and started running up the hill to make it to the summit before the time limit expired. But as they ran up, Natsuko blocked their path. As they raced for their lives with seconds to spare, the delusional psychopath stood in their way, trying to eliminate her competition. But Nobuaki was not having any of her madness and dropped her with a spear. As the others raced on, he tried to leave, but she held onto his leg. While Riona and Ryu raced up the hill, Ryu kept talking about his desire to make Nobuaki and Teruaki proud of him. Riona told the spineless twig to try making himself try for once, but he couldn't care less about what she was saying and ran ahead of her to finally reach the summit in the nick of time. Nobuaki had also made it up in time. To Riona, his life was less valuable than the fact that he was still piggybacking Aya. So he set her down and told Ryu to look through the obedience messages to see who had made it to the summit. After seeing that the others never made it to the summit despite being ahead of him, he shifted his attention to the psycho behind him, who claimed that they might have just fallen into traps or gotten lost in the hills. Before he could get proper interrogation done, Ryu dropped him with a boulder. His obsession with getting stronger for Teruaki and Nobuaki had taken a very diabolical turn and had him looking like a lifeless killing machine. The mission for that day was no joke either, as they had to create a life-size doll with their human body parts and complete it by dusk to avoid being punished. Ryu, who wanted to get down to business, got a chainsaw from Natsuko and started off the doll project by taking off his entire leg. The weakling wasn't strong enough to push the saw through and eventually bled to death by his very own hands. Natsuko then took over and went to ask Ryona for a part of her choice for their doll project. Anna, the weak girl Nobuaki was backing, woke up and tried choking out the psycho lady, but her poorly planned attack ended up causing her quick and very unremarkable end. Before she could get that pound of flesh from Ryona, Nobuaki finally woke up and learned about Ryu's short-lived rampage that ended with only him. He then focused on Natsuko and told her about how such a dangerous order made no sense as none of them could actually survive that, but the psychotic nutjob couldn't care less as long as she was surviving the game. Natsuko knew that Nobuaki and Ryona knew something about the game, so she asked them to spill. They showed her the single-word texts from the victims Nobuaki knew and found, and Natsuko revealed that she had actually kept the same texts from her own school as a part of an insurance policy to ensure she survived. After they examined how the game started off as a virus, then spread out into the world by infiltrating technology, hearing this, Natsuko combined both their phrases, and it formed a sentence that claimed that as long as one of them lived, the game would continue to spread until it caused a total annihilation of humanity, meaning that to end the game, they all had to die. Natsuko, who definitely had no such plans, kicked Ryona to the side and pounced on Nobuaki to take away his airflow. As she squeezed and waited for him to croak while crying, Ryona managed to get back up and use the chainsaw to give her back a quick massage. Like white girls in a horror movie, she turned her back to the half-dead psychopath and started professing her love to Nobuaki with tears in her eyes. Right before she came in for a kiss, Natsuko got back up and finished him off with the chainsaw. The psychopath actually loved her arch-nemesis and wanted to be the one to take him out. When he finally went into permanent sleep after telling Ryona to survive, he woke up in a flowery paradise where all his friends were waiting for him, as well as his long-lost true love, Chiemi. Ryona, who was now all alone, took his body to the beach and laid down beside it. After trying to give him a kiss and failing to wake him up, she pulled him into the ocean, where she decided to join him on the other side by drowning herself with him.